Georgia versus Alabama in Tuscaloosa, week 4 of the 2024 college football season. And this is a big game for the year. This is going to have a lot of implications on the playoffs, on the NFL, on recruiting classes. For the first time since 2007, Alabama is a home underdog in Tuscaloosa with Georgia coming off that shaky game. Alabama, yes, they look shaky to South Florida, but they've handled business all year. They are a 2.5-point underdog. Half of the NFL is going to be at this game. 17 NFL teams will be at this game. Ton of prospects, ton of recruits, ton of scouts really is the right word, are going to be there. And when I heard that 17 teams are going to be at this game, this is how you know it's got major implications. Major implications. Who needs to win this game more, though? I feel like that's the biggest question walking into this. And I have an argument for both coaches. I'm talking about the coaches, or rather the programs here for this aspect. I'm going to make an argument for both of them. Kirby Smart, because of outside of the first national championship when John Mechie tore his ACL in the SEC title game, and Jameson Williams tore his ACL in the national championship that Georgia actually beat Alabama in for the second matchup of the year. We know Georgia lost in the first one in the title game. Kirby Smart cannot beat this team. He can literally beat every team not named Alabama. And of course, we've seen some of the slip-ups over the year with the Auburns and the South Carolinas and the other teams that have tripped Georgia up. But close or far, Kirby, outside of that national title game, cannot beat Nick Saban. You guys saw me come on the show last year when I went live for the instant reaction. I appreciate the love on that, and talked about how Georgia lost the SEC championship. This cannot go from a Nick Saban to an Alabama issue, because that's what people are going to be thinking. If the best coach ever in college football, Nick Saban, retired, and now Kirby Smart is the best coach in college football, or at least fighting for that spot, Steve Sarkisian would probably have something to say about it, maybe even Ryan Day as well. This cannot be a Nick Saban issue, because if you go and you are on the road in Tuscaloosa and you lose, people are going to look at it as a program versus a program issue. It will be a Crimson Tide problem. It will no longer be a Nick Saban issue. Kirby Smart is the better coach here, I believe, out of the two. And y'all know I have massive respect for Kalen DeBoer. I've been saying all year that I think he's going to be successful with Alabama, but I think a ton of pressure rides on Kirby. Now you turn on the flip side to KDB as well. He has to set the standard that he can win high pressure games in the SEC, because we see them get a little bit slipped up with South Florida, and then obviously they take off with it. But he has to be able to win games like this at home in the SEC, and he has to show that Bama will still reign supreme over Georgia for now as the better program, because of course we know what they did in the tenure of Nick Saban. Kirby kind of trying to take the reins from him, build Georgia into that powerhouse program. Darby, stay tuned, man. We're talking about how rough Trevor Lawrence is looking, because I had to dig into that and just really revisit that 2021 draft class. So when you look, Georgia has the 5th best recruiting class for 2025, and Alabama has the 2nd. This outcome of this game is going to swing prospects in high school to commit to either one or two of these schools. But I think Kirby undoubtedly, without question, knowing that he's been in Nick Saban's shadow in a way, knowing that he got hired from Bama over to Georgia, Kirby Smart is 1-5 against Alabama with Nick Saban as the head coach. The only win in the national championship, or I guess you could argue that's the most reputable one. But we see Georgia play Alabama earlier on in the Natty, and of course they lose when Tua comes in and absolutely steals the show. We got to talk about the deciding factors for this game, though, because Alabama is number 1 in the country with 11 touchdowns of 25 yards or more. So we know that they can light up the scoreboard. There's no question about that. Milrose, really crazy out there. We know they have Jam Miller in the backfield, those slew of Alabama running backs they always put into the league. And then Ryan Williams is looking really nice on the outside as well. But Georgia usually doesn't give up explosive plays, and they'll need to keep this up to keep the crowd at bay, because we know Tuscaloosa is crazy. It's a hostile environment. And if you do not get that crowd under control, they will literally roar you out of the game. They will get you so flustered on the field to where you just won't be able to play effective football. We know this is one of the toughest places in the country to go and play. And Alabama also has shown to be susceptible to the deep ball. Now, they haven't necessarily been beat with it, but when you're looking at the all-22 tape, when you're looking at the bird's eye view of the secondary, they're getting gaps behind them. But the programs, and more importantly, the quarterbacks that they're facing, just haven't had enough talent to actually hit the throws and set up the big scores. This is another area that Georgia has to take advantage of. They have to be able to have those big plays. And unfortunately, Georgia has not shown us that all year. But again, you want to be able to keep the crowd out of this game. Georgia has a hell of a schedule this year, on the road against Alabama, on the road against Tennessee, on the road against Texas, on the road against Ole Miss. In case you didn't know, that's 4 of the top 6 teams in the nation, and Georgia's one of them. Georgia has a hell of a schedule this year, and they're going to have to learn to keep the crowds out of this game, starting with this game here in Tuscaloosa. And unfortunately, Georgia, again, they do not have those explosive plays like when the Ladd McConkeys and the Brock Bowers of the world were there, the George Pickens of the world, when Stetson Bennett was able to deliver to the football to those guys. No player has more than 2 catches for 20 yards on for Georgia. It's all short. It's all inside play. It's all things that Carson Beck and Kirby Smart have not allowed to flow down the field yet, that Mike Bobo, who feels like is the most hated offensive coordinator in football. These are the things that have to be corrected. It's such a hostile environment. That is arguably the biggest factor of this game, because if both of these teams play, let's just say perfect, to talk about it in a vacuum, the crowd will be a big factor. And we know what type of pressure they put on these people, because Kirby only loses to this team in the last 5 years. Nick Saban accounts for exactly half of Kirby Smart's losses. Half of them. Kirby Smart, 10 losses at Georgia. Half of those come to Nick Saban. We also have Tate Ratledge, who is one of the best offensive linemen in college. We know he's going to be playing on Sundays, one of the best, if not the best offensive lineman for Georgia. We saw him go out in the Kentucky game. He's dealing with a high ankle sprain and a knee sprain. And we also saw how Kentucky sent the house at Carson Beck once he went down. Georgia has to prepare for that. If Carson Beck is not upright, if Carson Beck cannot take the time to go through his reads and dissect these plays, and Alabama brings the house like Kentucky did, and you know that they've been watching tape. That's what they do at Alabama. And just because Kalen DeBoer is the head coach doesn't mean that there's going to be anything different. Carson Beck needs to be prepared to step up in big moments in this game, because there's going to be adversity. You're already dealing with not one of your star O linemen. Again, on the road, ranked team, biggest game of the year, biggest game of your career outside of the SEC championship. And you can even argue this one competes with that, because it is the Alabama Crimson Tide. He's got to flash his talent. I think Carson Beck is okay. I think that Carson Beck on his best days is a good quarterback. I would not put the word great. I would not put the word elite. I would not include his name in a Heisman candidacy. But if he can just show us that he can be slightly special and overcome these problems in this game, Carson Beck could change a lot of people's minds. More than anything, Georgia has to contain Jalen Milroe, though. You look last year, a little over 190 yards passing in the SEC championship, about 65 rushing yards. So that's a formidable output to basically be in Georgia's backyard and win that game in Atlanta. Georgia has to prepare for Jalen Milroe. We know Jalen Milroe's not the flashiest with his arm, but he's got a gun. We know that he can move. We know that he can use his legs very well. And at the end of the day, he is an intelligent quarterback. And he's going to try to exploit as many holes in Georgia as he can. Georgia has to keep Milroe under wraps. I'm taking Georgia to win this game 28-24, and it's going to be an absolute banger. This is going to be the game of the weekend, maybe the game of the year. It sets the stage for what Georgia really has to look forward to with, again, Tennessee on the road, Ole Miss on the road, Texas on the road, and they're playing Alabama. 4 of the top 6 teams in the nation right now, Georgia will play on the road this year. And I wasn't too worried about Tennessee coming into the season. Not really so much about Ole Miss, but I circled this Alabama game, and I damn sure circled the Texas game, because it is going to be a great one for the Bulldogs to come and play in. Darby, I'm gonna get to some of your chats here. So Carson Beck is a projected first overall pick. Is he really that much better than Stetson Bennett? I don't think that Carson Beck is better than Stetson Bennett at all, bro. I really don't. Stetson Bennett showed us in times of adversity that he could step up, he could show up, he could show out. He showed us in the SEC championship game that we did lose, that he could step up and make throws when we won the Natty a few years ago. When we lost the SEC championship to Alabama. That's the game I'm referencing. And even in the national championship, the first one that Georgia won, he made plays. He stepped up in the pocket. He delivered strikes. He threw 2 touchdowns in each game, if I remember correctly, after facing big negative plays, after facing turnover-worthy plays. So I just think personally Stetson Bennett was an overall better quarterback. Stetson Bennett was just more He was just more prepared for the moment. That's the best way to say it. And I don't mean prepared for the everyday football, but I mean prepared for the moments like he showed us in those SEC title games and in the national championship. I don't see Carson Beck as a first round pick, man. Maybe because it's a weak quarterback class, you can try to convince me, but as of right now, Carson Beck is not a first round talent. He might be a third or fourth round talent, fifth round possibly. He has nothing special about him. There's no it factor about Carson Beck. There is no that guy does that better, or that guy does that better than anyone in the league or in the country, or does it better than most people in the league in the country. That's just not something you say about Carson Beck, and that's okay. Georgia has to cater to his strengths and mask his weaknesses. Again, give me Georgia 28-24 to win this game.